Yeah, my name's Trey Hill. I own and run Harborview Farms. It's a generational farm. I think I'm the fourth generation. My father was quite successful. He's still around. He still helps me now and then. And so he grew the farm, and then I've since taken over. I've been here, I guess, been out of school for about 25 years, went to Purdue, been home here farming ever since. We grow corn, wheat, soybeans, and a little bit of barley. We do all I'll say regenerative. So we kind of are at the crossroads of, 100% cover cropped. All our beans and corn are planted into green fields. Wheat, obviously the fields are brown. We harvest the soybeans and then no-till the wheat. But we're 100% no-till. We do mixed species covers on everything. We're doing it on scale. So we're probably a little over 10,000 acres or so. So trying to do that, trying to hit yields on parity, trying to figure out nitrogen utilization. Sold carbon credits in 19, about to re-enroll in Nori again this year. So kind of getting into a little bit of everything. Love going and meeting people, collaborating with folks, do a little work in venture capital and work with some of those folks and do some advising and different things, and just always trying to meet and learn.
Great. Yeah. And for you, do you remember when you first started hearing this term regenerative, and where were you on your own sort of regenerative journey when you heard it?
It's obviously a long story, as everyone's is, but so we've been doing cover crops for like 25 years. Our state pays us to do it, and it's pretty lucrative. It covers the cost of the seed and usually an application of some type of herbicide. So we get about $50 an acre. So it's been a great program. It's lasted forever. But we always killed the cover crops off like early March because we never wanted to plant green because, what on earth would happen if you planted green? Obviously it would be catastrophic, be the end of the world. Well, some years are wet. You just don't get them sprayed. So we had to deal with those messes. And when we started dealing with those messes, we realized that it was a lot easier to farm that way, which we've since made it more complicated. But we had a couple fields where we could really plant on days we couldn't otherwise plant. The planters were working better. The soil was working better. We were getting less compaction. We were alleviating some of that. So we were learning. That was probably 15 to 20 years ago. That was before regenerative. This was all just to pull nutrients up, to protect the Chesapeake Bay and the rivers and all the stuff that's associated with Maryland. So when we started hearing regenerative, I was already kind of trying to brand myself and figure out what that word was. I liked ecological because that's kind of how the organisms relate to one another and different things. So it's kind of a good fit. I still don't like to use the term regenerative to describe myself because then you get regenerative organic, you get regenerative low input, high input. Then you can get into perennials with animals. We don't do animals. I like to go on vacation. I like to travel. I like to get away from the farm, so therefore animals become quite the impediment. My in-laws are dairymen, and I see what they do, and it's a tough life. They work not a lot more, but they work more than I do, and they work a lot more days. So trying to figure out that animal integration. I think my daughter wants to farm someday. She seems to be the one that's interested, so I told her that she's going to have to take it to the next level.
Right. The progress that you all have made in Maryland with the Chesapeake Bay and is a model, I think, probably the rest of the country as they try to move towards what a lot of people refer to as climate smart practices in the future. What do you think as if you were advising, the people who are creating the next farm bill or leading this charge, what can we learn from Maryland that the do's and don'ts that we should apply to the rest of the country?
I don't know. I mean, we got mandated nutrient management plans 23 years ago. I think 99 was my first year, 98. I think we started doing them a couple years as a precursor to the mandate. I don't know. I don't like mandates and I don't like regulation, but I think it helped because it fixed the folks that were over applying. We made some adjustments within our own fertility programs that were for the better. I don't feel like it really limits us in yields unless you get into some irrigated strategies where you're looking at, like really high bushels per acre. And then what really sealed it up was the cover crop program was the easiest because if you look at climate smart farming, it's no-till and cover crops, right? I mean, it's really not complicated. Like everyone wants to and nitrogen reductions, but nitrogen efficiency, but we're doing nitrogen pretty efficiently anyway. So getting paid to do cover crops makes it really easy to make the decision to do cover crops. So I would say that was the easiest one. There's a bunch of different programs out now where people are trying to get this money to do it. Or, I did Equip, but it's a 3-year program and cover crops are tough to make pay. It's a lot of extra work in the fall. It's really puts a burden on you in the fall. We've dedicated to do it, but having that continual monetary amount coming back to us to pay for it makes it a lot easier to hire a person, makes it a lot easier to justify putting all those acres on my drill to, have to rebuild it and all that stuff. And then it gives you the time to really allocate to learning. So that was the best. And we engaged a lot of I work with a lot of the environmentalists myself personally and have really enjoyed it. It's odd. If you had told me 20 years ago that I would be saying this today, I would have thrown you out of the room. But, I helped, I've been on the riverkeeper boards. We combined 3 river keepers and made one bigger river keeper organization because I farm on all 3 rivers, and I helped formulate this new group as part of the leadership team. I work with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and I found that the folks that I thought were always against me were really with me. As you go, if you do I like to do analogies. Like if you do it to cycling, like I always thought they were just putting a headwind on me or making me go uphill, when really I found that they were trying to put a hand on my back and help me up that hill. So I think that a lot of it was just a passion. They were like, Trey, what do we need to do? And I'd say, oh, well, if we could just do cover crops, they said, Trey, why don't you just do cover crops? If you just did cover crops, the bay would be cleaner. I said, well, if you pay me to do it, then I'll do it. And you get into the whole subsidy argument, and you can argue it all you want. But, if you're doing a social good, it's often presented wrong to farmers because it's framed as a subsidy. And I'm going, no, the guy that blacktops the road out front is doing a public good, and he's getting paid for it to make a living. If a farmer is planting cover crops, he is doing a public good to help make the water cleaner. Therefore, getting paid for it is not charity. It is not welfare. It is me getting paid to do a job. And that way of thinking and talking about it kind of gets the environmental community on it, because you don't want the other side saying, hey, we're giving you money. You want to be able to say, hey, I'm earning this money because I'm providing a service. And I think getting some of that language worked out on both sides. Like I'd go to the environmentalist and I'd say, hey, look, if you go tell a farmer he's doing things wrong, you're insulting his whole family. They'd go, what do you mean? I'd go, well, I learned from my father. So if you tell me what I'm doing is wrong, you need to use different language here, guys. You need to say, hey, we're going to make it so that you can do the same thing, but do it better, and we're going to pay you to do it. And from the farmer side, it was the same thing. It was like, don't get defensive if someone says what you're doing can be improved, because there's always room for improvement. That's life. And I think getting kind of those conversations going in the right direction was key. And then as you go to ask for funding, for us, it was the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and our farmer organization. So if you have Farm Bureau and Chesapeake Bay Foundation agreeing on something, that's unheard of. But that's a pretty easy choice for a politician, because you're even in very divisive politics. That's kind of a net gain for everyone. So I'd say that was the biggest lessons I've learned, and as a state, we've probably learned, is that working together in collaboration. You hear those buzzwords all the time, but I mean, it works, or it's worked for us. And like I said, we get dedicated funding for cover crops. We have mandated nutrient management plans, which you could argue are bad, and I get audited, and I have to keep records and all these things. But I mean, I've been doing it 20 some years, and I'm still in business, and we deal with it. When I get an audit, it sucks because they go through everything on your farm. We've been able to keep them private, which has been the big fight. We haven't been fighting about it lately, but over the years, some years they do, some years they don't.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate that. I always hear, because I'm on the other side of the country, but I always hear about the Chesapeake Bay and Maryland and how much progress has been made by getting the farm groups and environmental groups to work together. So it's really neat to hear your direct experience with that. Now, are the nutrient management plans, is that what initially drove you to look at Sound Ag's source product?
No, well, that was like 25 years ago.
Okay.
I would say in the regenerative world, in the space that I'm in, trying to figure out how how to make more money farming, right? I mean, that's everyone's challenge. I use sustainability as like 5 different things that you have to kind of intermingle and commingle, whether it's social, agronomy, profit, but financial is always at the top. So I would say that nitrogen use efficiency probably hits every single dot on the farmer's balance sheet, because 1, it's really expensive. 2, it's bad for the environment, both environmentally to the water and groundwater, also for the climate. So getting nitrogen use efficiency to me is one of the grails, that one of the things that we really need to cross. I don't view, I use herbicides and fungicides, and I don't know that they're that bad. I kind of view them as like a medicine as opposed to a poison, where they kind of help the crops, and hopefully we don't overuse them. We try to cut that back. But nitrogen, there's really, if that can be solved, that solves a lot of our problems, right? So sound is a pretty easy, I'd say that's what attracted me to that. Kind of met with them, interviewed with them, not interviewed, but just, chatted and learned about it, put in plots 3 years ago, saw the effects of it. They do the measurement for me, and now we've pretty much implemented it across everything.
And those plots 3 years ago, can you tell those people who may not be that familiar with the product, like what exactly are you looking for there? There's two different ways to look at it. It's, put down the same amount of nitrogen and add source as your insurance, or cut back on your nitrogen and hope that either you were over applying and the yield stays the same, or if you get to where you were actually applying the correct amount, which I don't know that I ever do. But in the event that I was, if I cut back, could I still get the same amount of yield out of it? Would it supplement that 20 or 30 pounds, which is kind of the direction we're moving, is this, trying to figure out how to cut back nitrogen rates. So the first year, we were getting like 2 or 3 bushel, but where it really stood out was on an irrigated piece. So we were fertilizing for high yields, and thought we were there. We grow, typically we'll run like 250 to 300 under a pivot, in terms of yield. So 250 we consider good, 300 is excellent. That spots will go higher, spots will get lower. But we always thought we were putting down enough fertility, but then where we put our source plot in, we gained like 15, 20 bushels. Because that's where I didn't have enough nitrogen, right? Most of my fields I had enough nitrogen and it was adequate, so I wasn't really seeing these big bumps. But under that pivot, it did, and that kind of let me know that it was actually doing something. Which a lot of the stuff that farmers get sold, it's really hard to tell if anything's doing anything. So once we did that plot, I was like, wow, this is something that I need to look into. And then we did, more plots the next year, where we'd spray a load, leave it out a load, put it in a load, leave it out a load, and got enough trial data out of that we were definitely getting. The ROI was pretty simple. It was just a matter of figuring out, do we want to go to 100% of our acres or keep doing trials, that sort of thing. It's kind of the methodology we use. We'll dive in pretty deep, and we'll dive in the deep end, but we won't, we won't always touch bottom on the first year or two. And Adam Lytle was on the show, and he's talking about how they have the tool to kind of assess where in your fields, you could benefit from source and where you might be able to cut nitrogen, or where it'll just perhaps increase yield. So is that something you use on an annual basis?
Yeah, we ranked them. So I actually sent them my nutrient management plan. I was just like, here, you guys run it through. And they'll probably kill me for saying that, because I'll have other farmers doing it. But they were like, sure, no problem. So they gave me a ranking based on management zones where they thought I would see the most impact from the product, which I thought was pretty cool, because the seed guys do that. But other than that, I've never really had a product where people actually will give you a ranking of where their product works. And I think that's, every product would have the same analysis of some sort, where you'd be able to do that analysis, but most folks don't. So I found that to be, pretty beneficial to me. And we use it, but it said that we'll get improvement everywhere. I have low organic matter soils, low CECs, and I think a lot of those kind of cater to the product. As you get into prairie soils and stuff, I'm sure everything, it's a whole different world than where I am. We didn't have glaciers. Right.
Or prairie. Yeah. and for you, I'm sure you talk to a lot of people about your practices, your sustainable agriculture practices, and they probably ask about, spraying, like where should sprays have, should any sort of chemical have any sort of a place in regenerative agriculture? How do you explain that to somebody trying to understand?
And I don't know. That's a tough one. I tell them that I can't do it without spray. I don't like chemicals. I don't want to be around chemicals. I don't want my team around chemicals, but I don't know how to do it without it. We try every year to do a field where we'll run the roller crimper, we'll no-till it. I'll go with the Rick Clark methodology, and that guy is just brilliant. Like I just can't quite get it. Like if we do a big species, like I'll kill the rye and I'll kill the vetch, but then the rapeseed comes back. And, so we're still using the chemicals. Like I said, I try to look at them not as poison, but as medicine. And that helps me kind of rethink the way I'm thinking about it. And I'm like, well, if I can get yields on, I think that my yields are equal to those that are doing non-regenerative practices, right? So we're growing pretty good corn crops. We're growing good bean crops and good wheat crops without any tillage, better than, because where we used to no till, we'd always get a yield drag. And we're trying to lower our inputs. I've dropped my atrazine rates. I've dropped my dual rates in corn. We use Lexar, which is dual metallochlor and mesotrione, and we've gone from 5 pints to 3 pints. So I know I'm getting weed control from the cover crops. I think I can drop my nitrogen, but I haven't had the nerve to do it. So I look at it as, hey, look, what I'm doing is like way different than what we were doing 10 years ago. And I'm thrilled with it. But I hope that in 10 years, like when I talk to my daughter, she's 15 and I'm like, look, Taylor, this farm better not look the same in 15 years. Like you've got to change it as much as I did. Like, what we're doing today, I hope what you do is 10 times better. Like what I'm doing is not the best. It could be done better. I'm just not smart enough to figure it out yet, but I'm going to try. So I just kind of go with that approach and just say, hey, this is my gig, fungicides. I go, hey, if I know I can spend $20 an acre and get 40 out of a fungicide application, who wouldn't going to do that? I look at the person and go, what have you changed in your life to help climate change get fixed? Would you spend an extra $10,000 on something? There's a few diehards that would, but for the most part, no. I was like, do you worry about where your food comes from? Do you request to have traceability within your food to know where the farm is? You start paying for the food, farmers are going to change. Yeah. So that's where I am. I agree with the purist. If I could do perennials with, pastured beef and be like, who was it, Will Harris down in Georgia, man, I just want to go to Bluffton and hang out with that guy. Like, just hope that some of it rubs off on me. But I don't think everybody can figure that out. Like the guy, you get these guys that are like geniuses that are, I'm going to let him figure it out. Then, hopefully my daughter can go to Bluffton and figure out what he's doing and we'll copy it, which would be great. So that's kind of been the take. I have lots of people tour the farm. I get folks from the University of Maryland classes and UPenn class, and I get Washington College and high school kids. And I get, just a broad range of folks with different belief systems. And we have really constructive conversations. And, I'm just here to learn and try to figure out if I could get to know chemicals, I'll get to know chemicals. If I can get that figured out. Yeah.
Well, if you go ahead.
And I think with chemicals, I think it's really weird because everybody's either chemicals or no chemicals. And like, if you're talking about soil health and stuff, like every chemical is a little different, right? I mean, there's like 1,000 different chemicals. Right. And I'm like, if I spray a fungicide out, they're like, oh, well, it's horrible for the soil. And I'm like, well, if I'm spraying fully canopied beans that are like up to your waist with a sprayer, it's not touching the soil. So who actually knows? I mean, my goal was to get the spray down into the beans. I've done research on sprayer droplets and tips and all this stuff for years. I can't get anything down in the bottom of the canopy to even get the spray down there. So I'm like, until the research is really done to know what chemicals are doing what, or until we understand soil health or understand the soil for that matter. I mean, I don't think that I understand any of it. I'm fairly into the loop of soils and health and all this stuff. I'm still counting earthworms. Mm-hmm. It's
right.
Not real technical. How many is this shovel full? Oh, we got 20 in this one. Oh, it's healthy.
Must be doing good. Yeah. That's probably a good proxy, but yeah, there's a lot still to discover about what's happening beneath the soil surface for sure. But if you had to guess, you mentioned kind of you hope the farm looks a lot different in 10 years than it does today as you continue to evolve. What if you had to guess, what would that be? What types of specific things do you see perhaps coming on the horizon?
I don't know. I think it's more, I think from a basic level, it's more multi-species cover crop mixes with a better, for me, honing in on the rates a lot better to get more diversity. We tend to have one seed dominate based on the soil and the conditions. I think some type of animal integration is probably going to be at least a portion of it. Where we live, there's a lot of people. We have small fields and small farms. So getting animal integration is going to be, I'll be excited to see what is it, Vents or whatever it is. That's like the shock collar on cows, what it does in terms of control. But where I live is going to be different than, South Dakota. If one of my cows gets loose by 6 feet, it's eating somebody's shrubbery. So I don't know exactly. I would say that's probably going to be it. Honing in on nitrogen, getting a better carbon footprint. And I'm hoping, now this is my pie in the sky, is that we're selling direct to consumers with some type of vertical integration, whether it's us doing it or doing it through a big CPG that's, letting the consumer know the farmer that grew the food and what the carbon footprint is. To me, is where we need to be and where we should be. I think that the anonymity of farmers has been a disservice for the last 20 years. I think it might have been a good technique 50 years ago, and how we became so anonymous and why we became anonymous. That's something that I think about. Were we pushed into it by industry, or did we do it ourselves? And who gains an advantage from us being anonymous? Is it the integrators? Is it the people that supply us, or is it ourselves? Was it done as a protection factor or for other people to take advantage of us? And I don't know the answer to that, but I'd like to break it up. I'd love to have my name in the grocery store. I'd love to have my farm name, my team out there. We're really super proud of what we're doing, and I think every farmer is. So I think it's a true disservice to all of us growing food that people don't know where their food comes from.
Right. I think you're right. And to do that, do you think it requires producing different crops than, kind of the grains and oil seeds that you're producing now? Or do you see it evolving to where even some of those big commodity crops have some sort of differentiation?
I don't know. I mean, we're fairly, like I said, we're on the larger scale of things. So, when I first got into this, I was like, I can't recreate the food system, right? That's just not my wheelhouse. I'm good at growing corn and beans. I'm good at running this company. I'm good at having a good team. I got good folks around me that are smart. So I don't know. My hope is that it's a blend of everything, right? For me, I hope it's growing corn and beans, and, it can go into the chickens, or the beans, or whatever. The wheat goes into the flour that goes into the pretzels. But I hope it benefits everyone. Will Harris, he said he hopes that there's a farm like his in every community. And I thought that was really cool, right? And I was like, well, that's really thinking outside the box and helping agriculture and helping farmers that. Now, I didn't actually hear him say that, but someone told me that he said that, so don't take that as a grain of salt. But I think that would be healthy, so that I could have neighbors. You've got 99 counties in Iowa doing pretty cool stuff. I saw them speak, where they're consolidating farmers to get, the right processing things in place. But I think it could also be on the large scale. I think that, to me, that would cause change of the farmer. Once we become in front of the consumer and the consumer can make demands on me, then the consumer can not only make the demand, but they can also pay for it, right? As long as I'm anonymous, they don't have to pay for it. Somebody tells me what to do, and I do it in order to get entry into a marketplace. And that's because I'm anonymous, right? No one cares. So I think if we could break that up with technology and everything else, I think we can get better traceability. And maybe it's a certificate on the side, and it doesn't get traced actually through the gut of the animal, but it does it in, as a, part of the whole, or the idea of it, where my corn would get commingled with, in a 1 million bushel tank, but I would get credit for that load.
Yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned earlier kind of working with Nori and selling carbon credits. Now, with the source product, whether you are using the same amount of nitrogen and getting more bushels, or somehow able to reduce your nitrogen and get the same bushels, either way, your nitrogen per bushel, ratio goes down, which is good. Does that factor in at all with the kind of the carbon credit situation? Or I would just think your net carbon, if you're sequestering the same amount of carbon and you're using less nitrogen per bushel, that, to me, that would have something to do with it. Does that factor in at all?
Yeah, Nori's different. I'm not an expert on carbon markets, because I think you'd need a PhD just in it. You'd have to write a 500-page thesis to understand it. But yeah, nitrogen efficiency is a big part of it. If you look at FBN's program with Poet and Gradable, it's all based on nitrogen efficiency, right? The whole premium is based on nitrogen efficiency. So I assume, when you take Source, which is a, 1 ounce to the acre product that hopefully has a low carbon, I would make the assumption or the hypothesis that it has a low carbon footprint in the production because it's so low use, that if you could offset, 20, 30, 40 pounds of nitrogen, that's going to be pretty drastic. I mean, that's pretty significant. I mean, I listened to Adam's interview with you the other day, and what did he say? If you got it on so many millions of acres, it saves so many millions of cars, or, he had the numbers.
Yeah, I think he said, I want to say a 20% reduction in nitrogen use would be like 200 million cars or something like that off the road.
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it is wild. And then, so along with that, you mentioned kind of, you haven't yet got to the point where you feel comfortable reducing your nitrogen use. What do you think it will take to get there? Because I know that's got to be against every intuition as a farmer to like put less nitrogen down, because it just feels like you're capping your own yield, I would think.
Yeah, it sucks. You get a good year and you're like, corn $7. Like, oh, I'll never have $7 corn again. I got to dump it on. But then corn goes to $2 and you're like, oh my God, I'll go bankrupt if I don't get that last 5 bushels. So no matter what, you're dumping it on. I don't know. We're learning. I was working with Granular the last couple of years, and before they shut down, and we really had some nice programs going. So I think just getting on-farm research is the thing. I don't know how I'm going to supplant what they were doing. We were taking 5 acres and doing, like 20 different nitrogen rates, or 4 different rates 5 times replicated, and then coming up with a analysis of the yield based on that. And it was typically where we had good cover crops and good legumes and everything else. This was unrelated to sound. This was just strictly a nitrogen use thing. And I think with the cover crops, we're getting a decent amount of nitrogen. Once you get into that cycle and you grow big cover crops and you start the carbon to nitrogen ratios get high, but they're breaking down more quickly. I think there's a lot of room for me to grow in efficiency there. But yes, it is very, very difficult to dial it back on more than 1 or 2 passes in a field.
So it sounds like, kind of the catalyst there will be just continuing that on-farm research and figuring out what happens on a small amount if I dial it down, and then maybe slowly spreading that to larger amounts. Is that right?
Yeah, I think
larger acreages, I guess.
Yeah, learning the products. I mean, you got Sound, you've got a few others out there doing similar things with much different ways. And I think just figuring each of those out and doing the strip trials and making sure. Right now I'm viewing Sound more as insurance, whereas I should be looking at it differently. I should be looking at to replace nitrogen, whereas now I'm going, wow, if I have a really good year, this is going to give me that extra 20 bushels.
Yep.
And I don't think that's the healthiest way to look at it. And I think it's the wrong way to look at it. But with everything being so new and it's such new technology, and the other folks are all new to it as well, that it makes me sleep better viewing it as insurance while I learn how to think about it the other way through trials. And once the trials over time prove that to me, then I'll feel a lot more comfortable and be able to start to really, dive in the deep end on it.
Sure. Great. Well, I know I'm getting close to the time I asked of you, Trey, here, but anything else that you would say about Sound Ag or the source product specifically to other farmers who might be, just on the fence and curious, and maybe having been burned by biological type products in the past and just concerned? I mean, anything else that you would tell those folks? I've had pretty good luck with it. It's worked well in corn. We're definitely getting paid back, and it's easy. We run fungicide at tassel emergence to tassel, so it's included in a trip, which to me is much easier than when you have to add an extra sprayer trip. Regardless, if you spray yourself or you get the co-op to do it, it's $15, right? 10 to 15. I mean, it's expensive to run these sprayers. Everything's gone up in price, and we could talk about fuel, labor, everything. The bean product I really like. It's a little higher use rate. It's 3 ounces, and they don't push it as hard, but the cost isn't that high. And I like that they didn't come to me and say, Trey, it's a half bushel to the acre, because that's like the worst thing to hear. It's only a bushel to the acre, which usually to me always means that this doesn't work, but if we're going to charge you a bushel to the acre. But we're always spraying beans over the top, whether it's, we usually have to come back with glyphosate at some point in the season, and we're usually putting on 1 or 2 shots, usually 2 shots of fungicide. So it's a pretty easy application. And I think they did a bunch of analysis last year. Last year we didn't dive in real deep with it. I think we had 8 different fields with trials, and I think we averaged like 3 to 4 bushel. So it's not setting the world on fire, but it's hitting singles, which I found in farming. When I was young, I always wanted to hit a home run, and now I'm just like, man, singles are nice. Like if I'm about 300, 330, like I'm doing good. So
I found it real easy to use and easy to get on. And then they do the analysis. And at first I was like, well, that's kind of BS that they're going to analyze my fields. Of course it's going to come out in their favor, but the ones where it didn't, they showed me, like, look, you didn't get a yield bump here. And I was like, well, that's cool. And they've got Adam was with granular. So they've got a little bit of a digital background. And when they put it together and sent me the email with all the results, it was done very professionally, and I would say equivalent to better than what I would have done on farm if I was analyzing it myself.
And the beans, that must be for phosphorus then?
It's phosphorus and nitrogen, and it makes sense. It's a little bit of late season nitrogen. I'm getting a yield bump in cover crops, and I think a lot of that's because of the legumes. So we're getting 30 or 40 pounds to our beans late season in high yield environments. This year we didn't get any rain in August, so I had a lot of 50 and 60 bushel beans, but I also had a couple places that got rain, and we get last, I'd say 5 to 10 years, we've been getting some of the Midwestern type yields, in that 70, 80 bushel range. And that's not to brag, but I think it was nitrogen, and trying to figure out how and when to time it without getting too much elongation of the nodes. And I think that the source product, by being able to go out there a little bit later and have the plant develop it itself, and pull it from the soil, it's giving you kind of that slow release or slow uptake of it, so I don't know if it's phosphorus or nitrogen. I don't know. We use a lot of chicken litter, so I've used got no phosphorus, but I don't know. Wow. But it seemed to work well.
That's right. You're definitely in chicken country out there.
Yeah. And we isolated it. We did it with fungicide, but when the tank loads without sound or without source, we run the fungicide by itself. So it wasn't the fungicide effect. It was the actual, the effect of the source.
Right. Well, I always like to ask, and this usually doesn't make it in, but is there any individual or company that we're not talking about here today that you also think is doing meaningful work for the future of ag that you'd call out?
I like Phycoterra. It's kind of a neat company. It's a algae that feeds the microbes. So we've been doing different things, whether it's, sound, which is, waking the microbes up, or you've got companies that are adding a single microbe to this one, which is like, it's actually putting down food for the microbes. Yeah. So it's kind of a different concept. It was pretty cool. We're using a lot of it, more on relationship, but we're using it in a starter on beans. No, other than that, I think you guys, you cover the gamut pretty well.
Oh, thank you. Well, yeah, no, you're waking them up and feeding them breakfast.
Yeah. So I figure, and for me, it's a little different because when you're doing cover crops and regen, or if you define me as regen, the soil conditions are so much different and no one has any research on it. So it's hard to figure out what products are going to work for me compared to even most university trial data is done in conventional tillage, right? So it's a whole different medium than farmed and hasn't been farmed and grows cover crops. Not to say one's better than the other, but the amount of biology in the soil is clearly much different. So that's why we like to do a lot of on farm, and I think it's fun. So
yeah.